The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Now in their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord.
When I was a seminarian and a young priest, having some difficulty getting used to the vow of obedience, I always wore a little button around, and the button said, "Question authority." Now, I stopped wearing the button in 1990 when I was made pastor of a parish, a Holy Cross parish in Arizona, when I was the authority. So I took the button off, and I only wore it when I went to see the bishop. When I was first named a pastor at age 35, it seemed to me that I was too young to be the person in authority, to have the responsibility of overseeing and administering a parish of 2,500 families. So those early years of being a pastor made me reflect a lot about authority and where does it come from and how do you get it. The gospel tells us today that those listening to Jesus were astonished at his teaching because he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. But what does this mean? The scribes were the people in authority. So what does Mark mean when he says that Jesus taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes? There are two kinds of authority, and let me say a word about each one. Outer authority and inner authority. So outer authority is necessary because somebody needs to be in charge. Someone needs to be the responsible person. Families, organizations, universities, residence halls, clubs, teams, schools, parishes, corporations cannot run without somebody being in charge. Outer authority is usually conferred by someone else, or it's given as a part of a person's vocation. So, for example, in a family, the parents are the authority because it's part of the vocation of parenthood. In a parish, the pastor's authority is conferred upon him by the bishop. In a university, the authority is conferred upon the president by the board of trustees. Even Jesus, you might say, had outer authority, which was conferred upon him by God the Father. But outer authority is never enough by itself. neither in the home, nor in the team, nor in the nation, nor in the church. Outer authority alone will not carry the day. And that's where inner authority comes from. Inner authority means kind of just what it says. It comes from within us. Inner authority makes us credible. How do we become credible? Inner authority comes from living close to God, close to oneself, and close to others. Inner authority then comes from the center of our lives. It means being aware of and in touch with the reality of our lives and the truth of our lives. Living in faith and trust, trusting that God will take care of your life. Welcoming everything that happens to you as good news, knowing that through it, God will bring good and draw you closer to himself. It's good for your salvation. Trying to believe that everything that is in your life belongs in your life. Reflecting deeply upon the experiences that you have been given, thinking them through and integrating them into your own life. So you might say that our experiences, reflected upon, prayed over, integrated into, are what eventually give us inner authority. So you can see why inner authority is not easily arrived at. You can see why it's tough. It's difficult. It means accepting everything in your life, integrating it, praying over it, and making it part of who you are. But when we do not accept the truth of our lives and do not act out of it, we run the risk of being inauthentic. We run the risk of being a scribe. So you can kind of see why it's much easier to say, because I told you so, or because I'm the person in charge. But we know that that never carries the day. When we hear that, we kind of maybe nod to it, but we dismiss it. Inner authority makes us sincere and credible. We listen to people who act out of inner authority because, quite frankly, we cannot afford to not listen to them. They draw us in. We want what they have. We want to be authentic. And we really do owe our inner authority to one another. That is to say, we owe what we have learned about right action and right judgment to one another. Maybe you've heard this three-phrase saying, right action comes from right judgment. Right judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. But it doesn't matter, because if you can integrate that into your life, accept that that is your life, then it helps make you sincere, credible, having inner authority. It's our responsibility to use outer and inner authority for the good of the world and of the church, remembering that outer authority is only credible when it's linked to inner authority. And we use whatever authority we have for one reason only, to draw people closer to God and to themselves. So the scribes and the doctors of the law that we hear about so often in the Gospels, they lived far from themselves, far from others, far from God. Unlike Jesus, who was close to God, close to his life, and close to others. This closest to God and to people and to himself is what makes him the pastor, is what makes him credible. The scribes and the Pharisees had outer authority, but they could not reach the hearts of people. Jesus is close to our pains and our sins. That is why he can reach us and what it is that gives him inner authority. Now look at the world leaders today. Most of them have outer authority, but such little inner authority, which is why no one listens to them and basically ignores them. But one world leader who has inner and outer authority, of course, is Pope Francis, the Holy Father. He certainly has a lot of outer authority. He names bishops, writes encyclicals, gives speeches, preaches every day, makes all sorts of decisions, and this sort of thing. But the world has come to love him and revere him because he has inner authority. He is close to God and close to people. There's something that he has that we want. He speaks to our hearts. We listen to him and we believe him, not primarily because he's the Pope, though that's important, but because of who he is as a person, because of his inner authority. It's his inner authority that makes him credible. So Pope Francis uses the outer authority given to him by God and the inner authority also by God to invite all of us into a deeper living of the gospel. When you listen to him, you can't help but say, I want that. I want that inner authority. So the inner authority that comes from God, from a life lived close to God, to others, and to oneself, is what makes it possible for anyone to live the joy of the gospel. The joy of the gospel then inspires us to use our outer and inner authority and to give our lives away in service to others.